Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. Today, I'm joined by Matt Smallman, and Matt is a voice biometrics expert, founder of SimNext Consulting, and author of Unlock Your Call Center. And we will talk about that book, amongst other things, later on. But Matt, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'm sure you'll agree, Matt is by far the most professional looking guest we've had. His setup is absolutely brilliant. We had a chat before the podcast about a week ago, and I got kind of tech envy.
I've got to admit to being a bit of a geek about some of this stuff, so apologies.
Not only a geek, and I think that's something you should lean into and be applauded for, but when I said about the tech, before I'd even kind of hit or finish the wrap up after our little chat, you'd emailed me all of the specs, everything, like a little shopping list that I've now got. So thanks very much for that.
You're welcome.
So I guess we're going to talk about the book later, but just in terms of some of the motivation behind that, was born out of some of the experiences that you've seen in your career, but also what you know is happening every day, right? In terms of poor kind of security experiences for us in the industry and also customers.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of things that kind of in my background that lead me to that. So first off is a brief but kind of significant military career where I was at the turn of the century, kind of global war on terror and the rest of it, was working on deployed operations and dealing with some quite significant risks in those environments, and quite often kind of solving new and novel problems with a combination of people and technology. And I think that kind of approach to risk management came through as I moved into the commercial sector, and I started working for some large UK retail banks, and eventually found myself in the contact center. And for me, the contact centers, like it's kind of the beating heart of an organization, because like no matter how much people do self-service, they're invariably quite transactional interactions. But when a customer really needs help or support from an organization, whether they could do it themselves or not, but they're seeking out another person, they turn to the contact center. And the jobs that the people do there on the front line are kind of there's kind of almost like cyborgian kind of roles, in my view. Like, kind of got so many screens and technology trying to augment this human who's trying to kind of do their best job possible to service the customer in the name of our organizations. And that kind of fascinated me. And as I spent more time understanding and working in kind of improving the performance of those organizations, it became increasingly clear, like the thing we need to do on every call is this, well, nearly every call in most organizations, particularly in banking, is identification and authentication. And it's just like, if I play that back to my military experience, it's like we're not actually providing any security, but we're making all these people do these horrible, torturous dances. And more importantly, our frontline agents kind of jump between this system and be really scared they've got a fraudster on the line and have to figure out whether it's question 2 from bank 3 or which one's the randomized pin today. It's really quite a challenging job for people. And I really felt like it held the performance of our organization, of our teams back. So I did kind of go out on a bit of a mission to try and find ways to solve that. And that's kind of what led to falling into voice biometrics, having been laughed at by a few officers along the way about 5-6 years ago. Oh no, almost a decade ago now, actually. And ultimately to what led to this book, kind of working with other organizations to help them implement this technology and figuring out, like, this is not a kind of one-off problem. Like, there's not one person on probably watching this or listening to this now who doesn't have one of those terrible security experience dinner party kind of conversations. Oh, I called XYZ and they made me do this. I think my best example was my wife's credit card company, or my credit card company, who my wife is an additional card holder to, speaking to them when she tried to set up something. They locked her card. She couldn't speak because she didn't have her PIN password. So I had to call them after waiting in queue and being told because of COVID, and you can do this online, which I couldn't. Getting through to somebody who then asked me exactly how much my what my credit limit was, which was conveniently the amount they'd just told me in the IVR before I got to them. So it's like, I'm not even sure this isn't even really security. And I refer to there's a great book, like after 9/11, there was a lot of what we call security theater going on. You remember getting on an airplane, you used to be able to walk onto an airplane without any security at all. But now no one would get on an airplane unless all the other people who were on the airplane had been searched and checked, and their toothbrushes hadn't been checked, they're not too long or too sharp. But that's not necessarily providing a lot of security, but it's providing reassurance to you as the customer, you as the user of that service. And there's a lot of security theatre that goes on in the world to make people feel secure. But this isn't even security theatre. Like, I know it's not secure. The agent knows it's not secure. The organization that runs this contact center knows it's not secure because they can see the fraud volume. So I almost feel that's kind of like a security farce. And I'm kind of my mission really is to get rid of those stuff. Like, if we're going to have security, let's have proper security, but let's choose security methods that are usable, efficient, and actually provide security. And that's kind of that journey is what led to the book and us speaking today. So that was a very long-winded, rambling answer.
No, I love it, because there's a lot to pick out there. And I guess to start with, and it's remiss of me that I haven't kind of asked you that career journey, because it's probably a different one to a lot of people are used to. Were you always sort of drawn to the military, or when did you join up?
So I joined up well before there was a. I joined up when we were peacekeeping in the Balkans, and when the Cold War was ending, and we were peacekeeping in the Balkans, and it all looked very very attractive with skiing holidays and sailing and a lot of sport. That rapidly changed, but incredibly kind of formative experiences. For me, it was like I learned an awful lot, but ultimately I kind of find it hard to motivate people in kind of who are intrinsically unmotivated. So eventually I found myself working in some very specialist kind of niches of that, and amazing teams, amazingly professional teams. But ultimately that wasn't kind of like, it's quite an intense period of my life, and not really conducive to family and children. And I just recently got married. So I left at that point and found myself in banking, and again, kind of almost starting on the ground floor, but kind of gravitated towards the contact center because it is this kind of combination of like technology. Like, if you don't get the technology right, then the people aren't very effective. But if you don't get the people right, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on technology. And if you don't kind of, as a manager, as a leader, kind of figure out how to put all those together, then the whole thing's ineffective. So it's some really formative times, particularly kind of leading change and crisis response teams through 2009, and when the banking crash and all the rest of it, and kind of when you're seeing the kind of 25-30 minute queues on the boards, it's like this is really formative experiences. But also realize, like, if we could take 60 seconds off every one of these calls because we didn't have to do this security dance, like, we could be getting to those people a lot sooner. So it kind of forced my mind at that point.
I know from being an agent and then leading agents that I always used to think, if you've had long wait times, and again, a lot of, after some B2B and outsourcing, I ended up in finance, where security was kind of drummed into you, that kind of. But I always thought, if someone's gone through a long IVR and then their first experience is to go through security checks, it's very hard then to kind of bring brevity to the mood, because they're frustrated when they arrive, then it's quite serious, and then you're trying to build rapport. It's very challenging.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And if we kind of fast forward, I think we're in kind of self-service 2.0, whatever we are now. So we've kind of all rushed to build these kind of mobile apps and websites, and they're kind of broadly functional. They meet the majority of needs, but they're not necessarily as effective at doing that as they could be. So there's still a lot of fallout of that, and people who would like to do stuff themselves who end up in call centers and contact centers because we haven't done a great job of the self-service stuff that they want to do for themselves, or or actually our products and propositions are too complex and we should get better at making those better. But even if we solved all of those problems and everyone who wanted to do stuff themselves could do it themselves, there would still be a whole chunk of people out there who are seeking a human interaction, who are seeking the kind of the empathy, as you talked about, the rapport, the relationship. They need someone to trust, who's giving them advice. It may not be actual advice, but they need to feel reassured that somebody has actually got hold of this. Like one of my favorite examples is working in the kind of a private banking division. Is like you could literally, and I think somebody did, buy an oil rig on our online banking service. It's like, yes, there was a couple of different approvals and some smart cards, and it was very secure and all the rest of it. But there was no reason that same customer wouldn't call up on the personal account to transfer some money to their children, because there's an emotional kind of connection to that. And exactly as you say, we call up with an intent. I know what I want to do. I know I need this help. I know I need someone to trust me or to explain this problem to me. And then we make them do this dance, like this whole kind of, you're not who you claim to be, but I am who I claim to be. I know I am. And I think we've kind of become complacent and just kind of, it's been beaten into us so long, we just kind of don't notice it. And I see that same thing in contact centers. We look at our kind of AHT stats when we're doing resource planning, and we kind of accept that there's kind of like up to 20% of that we do on every call that is just the security process. We're like, oh, that can't be improved. Well, it absolutely can. And when we do improve it, and we've seen some fantastic results, when we kind of get the whole pressure of the security process out of the agent's head, they're better able to listen to what the customer's saying. You know, that kind of that first 5 seconds of the call where I call it the unload moment, where the customer goes, oh, thank God I'm speaking to a human. I've got all these problems. Please help me with them. And most agents are going, I've got to get them through security, Hope they're not a fraudster, hope they're not a fraudster. And they just don't listen to that. And they hear one or two keywords. And we've seen some fantastic examples with clients where they're picked up on kind of, actually, no, the context of this call is slightly different. This is about something that it's not the stated intent, it's the kind of the unstated intent, and I need to respond to that and react to that. And because we've taken security out of the way and we've just turned it into a tick box on the screen that as long as it goes green, they carry on, they're far better able to serve that customer, and that customer is far more satisfied. And in practice, they enjoy their jobs more. Like very few people get into this industry because they want to interrogate people. there were other jobs you can do if you wanted to interrogate people. They want to help, and the kind of skills that we want and need in the future, those kind of relationship builders, problem solvers, technical experts, they're not the same sort of people who are happy spending 20% of their day interrogating people. So I think it's kind of it's as much a kind of retention and agent experience as it is a customer experience challenge for me.
Completely agree. And I know that the agent is probably thinking, well, this is the start of the QA scorecard right now. And the customer's talking to me, but I'm going, right, here are the 3 steps I've got to take them through. So I think that's an excellent point. You mentioned something there about you've seen some great examples and there are solutions. Can you just talk to them, the screen turning green, the tick going, how does this work?
Yeah, well, I think you led with the voice biometrics expert thing, and I think that's an interesting set of technologies. If you think about that set, like the in practice voice biometrics, like it's brilliant in the context of a phone call, because of using our voice is inherent in the interaction. We're not asking the customers to do anything different or separate on top of the call. We can just use the voice that's there, and the technology to do that has existed since the kind of the 1950s. But the kind of the applicability of it to our contact centers has been challenged by a bunch of factors like computing power, accuracy and performance of those algorithms, the integration complexity. But actually, as we kind of come into the kind of next wave of contact center technology platforms and like, it's significantly easier to implement these kind of technologies. And I know many people listening to this will have heard about this stuff before. And in fact, many organizations evaluated voice biometrics, particularly probably a decade ago, or maybe even again 5 years ago, and found it wanting for a number of reasons. And they were probably valid in thinking that at that time. What we have seen though is a large swathe of particularly financial services, particularly consumer-facing financial services, deploy this technology and see some really impressive results from it. So it is definitely quicker, easier, and more secure. Those interactions, we see increased levels of self-service, we see reduced handle time, we see improved kind of agent satisfaction with deploying voice biometrics. But it's not necessarily for everyone. And I kind of break down the security space into kind of three groups of stuff. So I call what I call traditional authentication. And if you think about kind of how did we get to the situation we're in today, and if kind of rolling back to the turn of the century, if you went to your bank, you'd literally be walking into your bank and they would probably know you. So they would recognize you. It's about the inherent properties of that. And then kind of banks started getting bigger and less personalized, and other service organizations became bigger and less personalized. And we started issuing account numbers. So that makes it easier to identify people. And then we started worrying about security. People started to take advantage of that. So we needed to add security steps and security measures. So we started asking simple questions. And it was fine to ask simple questions because that information wasn't out there. Like I could probably find out pretty much anyone's date of birth just by guessing looking at their Facebook profile or their Twitter page, or when do people say happy birthday to them on XYZ social platform. So date of birth is completely irrelevant. Mother's maiden name is almost completely irrelevant as a security factor because just all that information is out there. So we kind of evolved beyond that to what I kind of call more transitional methods. So stuff like we realize, and the advantage of those kind of questions is that they are pretty usable, but they've become increasingly less secure. Like customers don't have trouble remembering them. We might have most of that data and it's not hard to ask those questions, but they've become less and less secure. So as we've noticed, they've become less secure, organizations have started to implement additional security measures. And nearly every case, when they add security, then reducing usability and incurring an additional cost. So if you think about pins and passwords, yeah, it's like, oh no, I have to remember, is it like which pin did I use for this organization, or which password is it for this? And then we have to do that mental gymnastics of like, it's the 7th and the 12th character of my password, which must contain special characters, capitals, and 3 numbers. And we're like, oh, and it's technically it's more secure, but in practice it's significantly less usable. And if we actually look at the kind of the end-to-end metrics with some stuff like that, the efficiency is pretty poor as well, because we end up with a whole bunch of people in our either being denied service, and we kind of like if someone fails the security process and we deny them service, we kind of see that as success, or the security people might say that as success, but actually that they're real customers. 99.999% of those people who fail your security process are your customers, and you've just really frustrated them and annoyed them. And they may not have even be phoning about anything that was particularly risky. Or so I think we ended up in this kind of this set of transitional measures, which yes, do add security. And I put one-time passcodes and text to your phone. They do add security, some security, but they're ultimately they're quite technically easy to defeat. And that's where we see this kind of wave of social engineering attacks. Like I can phone you and say, oh, I'm just about to send you I'm phoning to check this fraudulent transaction or to confirm your order. I'm just about to text you a number, or your bank's just about to text you a number. Can you please tell me the number? Or hi, I'm calling from XYZ. Please tell me your 7th and 8th letter of your password. And then they're keyed into the online system or wherever they are. So they're becoming increasingly less secure as people target them, but they're still, like, their usability hasn't improved and their efficiency hasn't improved anymore, but they're just becoming less secure. So what I like to talk about is a set of modern authentication methods, and kind of the principle of these things is that they must be largely passive. So they kind of should be about who you are, what you have, rather than stuff you know, because stuff you know can be easily stolen and compromised. Stuff you are is a lot harder and more challenging to compromise. So this kind of set of modern authentication methods should also be probabilistic from the organization's perspective. So I can dial up and dial down, like how confident do I really need to be to give you a balance versus how confident do I really need to be to empty your whole account to a Russian bank account. So there's a very different set of risks there. And if I can dial that up as an organization rather than get the agent or the customer to dial that up, then that gives me a lot of opportunities. So I talk about a set of modern authentication methods, and that's to a large extent what the book covers. And most effective today, we have two. We have voice biometrics, which people will be familiar with for calling probably your retail bank. That comes in kind of two flavors, the kind of my voice is my password, or kind of slightly more conversational one that takes place in the back of the agent conversation. And in practice, whilst those kind of what we call text dependent methods, my voice is my password, they do have value, and they are adding value to those organizations and security. They're rapidly being surpassed by the kind of more passive and conversational technologies, which can even be used in a self-service IVR. So as you speak to, what would you want to do today? I'd like to confirm my order or provide you a meter reading or kind of talk about this. I can do authentication in the background of that. And then the second set of technologies is what we call network authentication. So most people now, I remember doing this analysis probably a decade ago. We look at kind of the inbound calls coming to a contact center, and we're like, we didn't even have numbers on half the calls that came in. And now I'm talking to clients, and we've got like 95% of calls come in with a declared caller ID number. And that's great because we can go and look that up in our databases. Most people are now phoning from mobile phones. Mobile phone numbers don't change that frequently. So we can go and look that up, and we can complete identification on the basis of that number. But can we be really sure that that number is the person on that line is the number it's claiming to be? And that there's a lot of risks of spoofing and all the rest of it. But the same kind of technology, the same kind of messaging that's used to get the phone call to our contact center contains a whole bunch of additional metadata, which tells us where it came from, where it's been on the route. And we can analyze that data to understand the risk that this person someone's trying to impersonate this phone number versus it being the real phone number. So we call that kind of set of technologies network authentication. And it has some distinct advantages over voice biometrics and some challenges to it. So you don't have to enroll people. We don't necessarily need, it's not necessarily particularly privacy invasive. So we don't necessarily need the same degree of permissions and consents and conversations and legal terms, which you might do for biometrics. But it does have some challenges as well. So we need to know the phone number. We need to be right about it. And there's some challenges with kind of related parties can get hold of your phone and stuff like that. So there are a range of different solutions that will be appropriate for different organizations, depending on the kind of the frequency of customers who are calling them, the level of risk they're exposed to, the better quality of data they have, the longevity of those relationships. So it's not like you must do this. And I'm like, whilst I started off probably as the biggest proponent of voice biometrics, I think kind of over the last decade or so, that the realism and speaking to dozens of organizations in multiple verticals in different countries, it becomes really clear that kind of like the principles are right, but we need to find the right technology to solve the specific organization's problem. And just I know I've been talking for a while, but the one thing, and I kind of my top tip for everyone is like, forget about kind of what you could do. Like many organizations I speak to don't have a good enough grip on how they're doing today. And I think that's the biggest problem. We've kind of accepted this stuff for so long that we just it's just ignored off in the corner. We won't talk about it, and like we don't actually know how we're performing. So it's very difficult to know what the value of doing better is if we don't know how we're performing today. So kind of, yes, there are a range of solutions out there, but figuring out which solution is right for you, you have to know where you're starting from. Otherwise, you're just going to get pushed around by vendors telling you the latest shiny widget, and that you have no idea whether that's going to be the right solution for you or not. So I'm rambling today.
No, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. It really is, and it's so thought provoking. Something you said earlier on just made me think about you can't help but think of your own experiences, and even just so using my phone and Face ID, but then needing to do something different. It was actually about some of the charity work that's going on to access the bank. I always get this. I always think, what did the previous version of me say? Because I take the questions a little bit too literally. So, for example, what was your first pet? Well, the first pet I had was a rabbit called Tetley, but that died when I was a baby because the next door neighbour's dog attacked it. The first pet I remember.
You probably shouldn't say that on a thing like this being recorded, and we can play it back later.
Well, well, good point.
Change your name to protect the innocent.
Okay. So let's say the one I remember was a hamster. I'm going to call that hamster Spider-Man now. And I remember thinking, what answer did I give? Because in my mind, it could be one of those two. And even that is just it, to your point earlier about there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, and I think as well as being a geek of technology and really excited, interested in that, I kind of in this field, I really enjoy some of the human psychological behavioral issues around it, and that kind of that's a cognitive load that we're placing on you. Yeah, like you called up with an intent, and your kind of rational mind is thinking, right, I'm going to speak to somebody, I'm going to tell them my problem, they're going to solve it for me. So that you've kind of played that out in your mind and you're prepared for that. And then somebody asks you that question, like, and that creates this huge amount of work for you. So this interaction now feels significantly more effortful than it actually needed to be. So you then end up projecting that effort onto your perception of that organization, and not that their question was particularly hard, but the load that came to you from answering it is now kind of built into your perception of them as an organization. They are hard to do business with. I'm not sure I like them. If I had a choice, would I go somewhere else? If an alternative came up, would I consider it? Because you've just added this kind of cognitive load that is now projected on that organization. And there are some other factors like cognitive dissonance when that's not what I'm expecting, and it kind of causes friction and stress. But yeah, there's a huge set of kind of behavioral, psychological things that I think we're just ignored in this, but we're just kind of like, this is the way it's going to be. I'm the organizer. It's kind of that power play, like, I'm the company, they're the customer, they'll do what I tell them to do. And I think kind of as we look forwards, that's just not a tenable competitive position for many organizations to be in.
And it is, like you say, from an operations point of view as well, ID&V, DPA, these were things that were not to be questioned, that you just did them. And then you tried to deliver as good an experience as possible after that point. But I'm really interested in where you ended up, which was for people that are listening, how do you assess where you are right now? Because like you say, the technology that's available now sounds like something we should all be getting into, and it sounds great because it's reducing that load. It's going to make it a reduced effort for the customer. But in terms of where people are right now, where do you start with really understanding how well you're doing or what you need?
Well, I think it like all things contact centers, you end up, you have to come back to the numbers. Yeah, this is a numbers game, and there's no, like, you're as a leader, or even on the front line, your perception of what's happening may not match reality. So you need to get those numbers, and the numbers are invariably challenging to come by. So I think if you we'll point people at the book and the website later, but what I use, the tool I found to be most effective is what I call the security path visualization, which is where we basically have like a tree diagram where we have 100% of calls come in on the left, and then depending on whether they get identified by our automated systems or authenticated by automated systems or handled by self-service, creates a set of branches, and whether they go to an agent for identification or an agent for identification and authentication, whether they get successful or unsuccessful, we kind of produce this branching structure. And that's incredibly, and we make the lines as thick as the percentage of calls that are going down them. And it's a real, we're not doing that type of podcast. I won't kill people with PowerPoint, but if you go to our website or go to look at the book, you'll see these diagrams, and without fail, every time these have been enlightening for the organizations that we use them with, because like, okay, because so in some companies, 20 to 30% of calls never hit an agent because they're dealt with in self-service. Yet all of those customers had to answer some terrible ID and authentication questions as well. And then a whole bunch more could have gone into that process if we'd just done a bit better at tying it up. And then we've got that whole kind of challenge that will drive everyone mad, which is like, we did identify the customer in the IVR, but we failed to tell the agent when we connected the call. So this visualization process, kind of getting into numbers, like from 100% of calls, how many got identified by IVR, how many got authenticated by IVR, how many of those ended up with an agent, how many who didn't ended up with an agent. I think that for me, that one step, it's in practice harder than it sounds, as I'm sure everyone on this will know. But that is probably the most powerful step, and then you can see where you are, and in practice each one of those branches, and we usually see kind of 7 or 8 of them depending on the kind of different permutations and combinations. You don't have to make it too complex. Each one of those has a different security implication, a different cost implication in terms of handle time, and a different usability implication in terms of what it felt like for the customer and for the agent. So once you know who's going down each of these paths, you can then understand kind of where you are today. And we do also have a scorecard that we use just to assess this. So if you're able to get those numbers, and you go to our website, you can drop them into a very quick scorecard, and we'll give you a score on the performance of your process. And we again always come back to these 3 dimensions. It's about usability, efficiency, and security, and they're all kind of slightly related. But that you need to understand where you start, and then there's some more questions, I guess, around definitely around kind of frequency of call, the type of risk you're exposed to, whether it's better to actually just think about fraud prevention rather than identification and authentication, because that's where you get your biggest reward from. And if you're successful at that, you may be able to reduce the load up front. Just thinking about it, just a quick anecdote from your previous call. I remember being in a discussion with a security team about how we were still seeing a lot of fraud coming into our organization, and it literally got to, well, we should ask another question then, shouldn't we? And knowing that, like, asking another question from our bank of whatever, we had 2 question banks, and you had to ask 2 from each. So we're already asking 4 knowledge-based questions. Some of them were transactional, some of them were personal. And the security team's responsible, let's ask another question. And I could guarantee, like, every fraudster we asked that question to would pass it, and 50% of customers would just drop off the end. And it's just not that you can't control and vary security like that. It's just another amusing anecdote. Sorry, dropping in.
No, I like it. Do you think people listening, even if they haven't gone through that exercise of understanding where they are, I think that it's great, and I've seen it in the book, and it is very powerful to see for sure. Do you think, though, that people are thinking, especially if they're in a sector that it's a real requirement, but do you think people are put off because they believe the technology is going to be prohibitive, either cost, implementation?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an element of that, and I would, like, having been on the inside of these very large enterprise deployments, like, over the last decade or so, some of those, like, those organizations have complex technology infrastructure. They have a huge range of regulatory and compliance requirements, and a lot of stakeholders with a lot of opinions. So those projects can become large and expensive, and the technology and the platforms they're operating with are invariably quite customized. I think today, and particularly what we've seen accelerated over the last 2 years, as kind of contact centers realize that their kind of on-premise solutions and their legacy technology just isn't working for them and isn't fit for kind of flexible working patterns, working from home, and all of that. We've seen this enormous shift to contact center as a service type platforms, and that so dramatically simplifies the integration process and delivery process. Like, in some of these platforms, it is a case of flicking a switch in the admin panel. Like, that's the technical integration. Yes, there's a bunch of business processes you need to come up with to figure around that, but that's a technical integration. And we've gone from kind of 20-30 cents a transaction or call down to kind of 2 to 5 cents, 2 to 5 pence per call. So, like, the kind of marginal cost of these, plus the cost and complexity of integration, is falling and continues to fall dramatically. I think what's also interesting as I look at the market with my kind of market analyst hat on, as well as a kind of practitioner, is that we kind of see this, we see kind of emergence of a stratification of the technology players. So it's not that there is just one player or 2 players who price at this level and serve this market. We have Amazon and Google with their own solutions, which work, but may not be the most customizable. But they're like at 1 cent and half a cent per call. Like, if it's only costing you half a cent per call and I'm saving 30 seconds, what's not to like about that? Yeah. Now, they may not be the most customized solutions, and for some, and because many organizations won't have a set of high security requirements, and those will be completely appropriate for them. And then what we've seen emerging in the middle is this kind of set of technology providers and white label products and add-ons to existing platforms, which are customizable, which do have kind of configuration that you would want as an enterprise. You want to choose your risk level. Yeah, how confident do I need to be? I might want to make special adaptations for my particular customer base, or to train it for my particular customer base, my particular use case. And we've seen this emergence of a middle ground of players in that market who are more about scale than they are about kind of the 99.9th percentile of performance in these others. And in practice, like excluding the kind of the big retail banks who are, by virtue of their size, the victims of most fraud, or the targets of most fraud, most of the rest of us, those solutions are more than good enough for us, and they come at a price point that's appropriate for most people. So I'm not saying that kind of I'm not saying it's an easy journey, otherwise I wouldn't have a job, but there's work to do. But I think if I thought about the barriers to this stuff, that the last remaining barrier, and particularly the reason behind the book, is enterprise and organization and business understanding that there is a problem and that they can then take action against it. So it's not that we haven't solved the technical problems, and it's not that it can't be done cost effectively. It's not that we haven't solved how do we put this in front of customers and how do we get them to use it. We've solved all those problems. It's that last gap. It's the kind of, how do we, like, do enterprises actually recognize that this is an opportunity to move on? And I think when I look at that, it's really interesting, just like the different global markets, the paces they're moving at. I think the UK is doing really well in that space, really recognizes that there's more it can do there. But it's really interesting just how that varies, particularly across Europe.
And let's get on to the book. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'm just going to hold up my copy, my signed copy, Unlock Your Call Center. There we go. And it's, do you know what? First and foremost, thank you for writing it, not just sending it, but thank you for writing it, because as you may know, I'm kind of evangelical about our industry and what a great industry it is. And it's always surprised me that there aren't many books written about contact centers. So your one was just great to see, and I'm really, really interested in, as I'm sure a lot of people are. You've talked about your passion, and you obviously evidence your expertise, not just here, of course, but across your career. But in terms of that passion to say, I really want to write a book, the motivation to do it is one thing, but then actually doing it. When did you actually start putting pen to paper or sitting at your keyboard?
Well, I think for anyone who kind of takes the step out of corporate life to be a consultant, to be an independent consultant, you need to think about your methodology and your approach. Like, what is it that I bring to the party that organizations can't do themselves? What is it? It's both knowledge, but it's also a set of tools and ways of working and ways of thinking. So as I became an independent consultant 5-6 years ago now, that was front and foremost to my mind. So I had this, like, I think these are the tools, I think these are I think this is the experience and the way of thinking that I bring to the problem, but I need to field test that in practice. So like I heard from a client yesterday that has done 73 million authentications with the technology that we help them implement. And that's like, okay, so this stuff, this works. Yeah. This is like, they were all quicker, easier, and more secure. So I think over the last 5-6 years, kind of my methodology and thought process has matured to say, like, okay, this is becoming repeatable. I'm not like kind of making this up like most consultants you get into your organizations, like let's be honest. Yeah. They're one page ahead of you in the book. They're making it up as they go along in some sense. Yeah, they're bright people and they've seen some other stuff, and they're just moving forwards just a bit quicker than you in some cases. So I became increasingly confident that, like, kind of this is working. Yeah. And then it became really clear that in the future, like we've done the large US retail banks, and financial services, we've done the UK ones. Like in practice, like people aren't going to spend kind of whatever I cost per day for multiple years on a project. So the next wave of people who want to use this technology is going to be different. There's going to be some people who need help, and there's going to be some people who, because of the practicalities of the technology, can do it themselves, but they still really need, like, to be successful, they still need some of these tools and these ways of thinking. And I think there are some really simple concepts in the book that over time have just become so pivotal to the way I think about this problem. So that the first is like the security convenience trade-off. Yeah. Like every security system, there's a curve that kind of, like, the most perfectly secure system is completely unusable. And the most perfectly usable system or most convenient system is completely insecure. And there's a kind of a trade-off curve that relates between the two. And every security system exists on a space on this curve, or in this space. And you can move the curve with some technologies, or you can just choose where you operate on it. And that's just such an important concept when I think you think about this problem, that I kind of needed to write it down to share it with people. Now it's a well-known in the security industry, but like you need, like, that's not the same as us in call centers, because like our way of thinking about these challenges is different. We need to put it in the right terms. It's not about kind of cryptographic security and how many bits you've got in your algorithm and what the whatever the crypto kind of way of thinking about it is. It's a different to that. So that was what kind of drove me, was to say, like, okay, these are important tools. And I think the other bit was my, like, after I got over the hurdle of, right, I mean, I have to pay the mortgage and I need to find clients, like, I actually became more relaxed about that. And I came back to kind of what drives me, what gives me the most satisfaction. And it's exactly that conversation I had with a client yesterday, like 73 million, that's 73 million people. And another client's got, who's well over 100 million of these now. It's like 100 million, that's just an enormous number of people. And although none of those people had to say their mother's maiden name. And it's like, wow, that's such a, I mean, it's a tiny little niche and it's a minor little thing, but like if I can just get one or two more organizations to do that, that's potentially millions and millions of interactions over the next 15, 20 years that are going to be better. People's lives are going to be better because of doing that. And I think that's what kind of, like, I felt I had something more to give to this. And yes, there's a commercial angle to it. It's like there's asserting your kind of expertise, but I felt it was something to give. And then the second bit of it was really, it's like, for anyone who's even started the process of writing a book, like, it's incredibly soul searching and encourages imposter syndrome on like the scale you wouldn't believe. But it does force you to think. It forces you to think about, like, this is the way I've always done it. Why have I done it that way? How would I explain to somebody that that's the right way to do it? Is it the right way to do it? Is that the right step? Is that the right way to move from step A to B, or step A to C through B? Or should I go through another direction? And just the process for me has been incredibly enlightening, and has really consolidated my thinking around this, which allows me to be a lot more effective with clients. And in fact, in conversations like this, like it's just, the process has been really, really great as well. And I think kind of, even if a book didn't come out at the end of it, then that would have been worth it in its own right. But I'm really hoping that the book kind of enables a lot of people to do stuff themselves. And if it doesn't actually get them to do it, at least gets them to evaluate whether it's worth doing. And that's why I've tried to write in this kind of accessible way. It's like, well, what is the problem? How do I understand the extent of the problem and figure out what the range of solutions might be? And then if I'm going to implement those solutions, how do I deliver them? How do I be most successful with them? So we try to break it up into that kind of structure.
Could you just talk about the kind of, I was struck by something you said then about it takes imposter syndrome kind of to another level. What can you just talk more to that? What did it actually feel like, and how did you overcome it?
You're right. You write this stuff down, and then so I was I hired a coach to help me because, like, I think I wrote in my mother's book, it's like, my teachers would never have believed that I would ever write a book when I sent it to her. So not that she's probably ever going to read it either, but the coach was really helpful, and that kind of held me to accountability. So there was a certain element of it which was like, okay, I have to do this. I've agreed to do, I've told her I'm going to do this chapter by this date. So I need to do this chapter by this date and send it to her, and she'll send me feedback. And you can get very stuck in the process of that. So the actual kind of writing the first draft was kind of okay. But then then you put the first draft together and you've got like a test version. And in the process I was using, I sent that out to about half a dozen people I know well in the industry and who are kind of acquaintances but not close friends, and asked them for their feedback. And these are experts, yeah. And they're like putting that in the post, like it was finished 4 weeks before I actually sent it. In practice, I may have kind of changed the font once and moved some pages around, but it was ready to go at that point. But you're just really worried, like, you're going to be evaluated by people. What are people really going to think? Are they going to like it? And that kind of human requirement to please was just like, and then you kind of question yourself, who am I to write this? What do I know about this? I'm sending it to these people who I consider to be experts. Shouldn't they write it? Are they going to find holes in my argument? And they found some holes, which is good. And we improved as a result of doing that. And that's a healthy process. But then you get back to the final draft and you have to approve it for sign off. You're like, no, I don't like that. I want to change this. I want to change that. Or should I do that differently? Or what are people going to think about it? And yeah. And so we're speaking now a week ahead of the official launch, where the Kindle version will go down to 99 pence. So for 2 days, so 30th, 31st of March, just get that in quickly. I am petrified. I am absolutely petrified. Like, what will people think of this? And like, it's completely irrational, yeah, because this is my domain. Like, I probably more than anyone else in the world have deployed more of these projects at the coalface and understand how they work with more different organizations. Most organizations do this once and then you move on to something else, and I've done it dozens of times. So I do know what I'm talking about. I have to remind myself that, but I'm still petrified that somebody's going to say something like, I got it is actually out already, but I got a 3-star review on Amazon, and I was like, oh, and no feedback. And I was like, oh no, someone doesn't like it. And I was almost in tears. My wife was like, well, have another gin and tonic, it'll be fine. Or have another beer. And I was almost destroyed by this. It turns out it's my mother-in-law who doesn't know how to use the Amazon rating system.
That's what she's saying.
Sorry?
That's what she's saying.
That's what she it's gone back to 5 stars now. So I don't know what that,
good.
I think, but it is difficult to put yourself out there, but then I have to keep coming back to that purpose. Yeah. Like, if I don't put myself out there, then fewer people are going to hear about this problem, recognize it, and do something about it. And so that's kind of the process, and the imposter syndrome is kind of what's kept me coming back to that mission as well, which I think is really, and to be really clear about that mission. And kind of, we're updating websites and marketing material and stuff at the moment. It's like, no, let's just be honest. Like, our mission is to do everything possible to get stupid questions out of call centers. And if that means writing books, if that means doing podcasts, if that means consulting for clients, if that means helping technology vendors come up with better solutions, if that means teaching classes, we'll do all of that, because that's what we're here to do, is to get rid of those stupid questions. And if that's the only little tiny dent I make in the world, is getting rid of some questions for some places, then I think that's kind of okay. I know there are bigger things going on in the world right now, and that's really challenging, but I think we've all got to kind of choose our battle.
I love someone on a mission to make things better in our industry, and you'll absolutely have my back. And like I say, it's quite amazing, really, when you think we have 6,000 call centers in the UK, about 1 million people working in them, and everyone engages with them. Yet there's hardly any literature out there that originates from the UK, certainly. So more power to you. Can you just remind, when is it out again?
So the book is out now. It's available on Amazon, both paperback and Kindle, or from other booksellers. On the 30th and 31st of March, the Kindle version will be 99 pence in the UK for 48 hours only, as to kind of celebrate the launch. And our website, unlockyourcallcenter.com, which is both the US and US English and UK English spellings, just to help our colleagues across the pond. You'll be able to find out more information, and in fact, you can get the first chapter free to download from there, and that's where you'll find the tools and some other interesting material there. So yeah, out now. I was hoping to get it in time for people to put in their Christmas stockings, but we quite missed that deadline. I'm not sure it'll be that exciting for people, but yeah, I'd encourage people to get the book. It's a starting point on this process. I'm quite pleased with the way it's turned out. So I'm hoping that it will help people to kind of start this journey. And then if depending on how far they get, I'm kind of here to help as well. Like that there's a lot more we can do in this space. And I certainly my plans for this year are to kind of increase kind of tools and awareness and just stuff that's out there for free in the public domain to help people solve these problems. And we kind of talk about some of those in the book, but I've got some other exciting plans and stuff that just help bring this problem to life for more people.
Do you think you'll do another book? Have you got the kind of, are you going to have a period of like, just like you say, you've got other stuff going on?
If you ask my family, I think they'd say, no, you can't. Honestly, I think it's kind of, for the moment, like if I thought about the kind of the tool set of things that I think I can provide to people to solve this problem, then I think the kind of the book is one of those tools in the toolbox. And I can see there being updates as technology improves and as understanding improves and as new technology comes along. But I can't see there being a different, like this is the book if you to solve this problem. And I also can't necessarily see myself like there's more than enough in this to take a lifetime of kind of work in this space. Yet there are lots of other interesting domains in the call center that I'd love to be involved in and sometimes do, but like this is the one, I think. So I don't think there's another book, but let's come back to that.
Well, Matt Smallman, author of Unlock Your Call Center, thanks very much for coming on. Get that wrap. I thought that was really, really interesting. Thank you and good luck.
Thanks very much for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.